How distinct and different is the Creole language in St. Lucia compared to the rest of the Caribbean?
Well, first of all, Creole in Saint Lucia, and you realize we don't call it Creole, they call it Kwéyòl because it's a French-based Creole. So you always say Creole, but if somebody says Creole, we understand it because in Barbados they have their own Creole language, which is mainly English, but of different way. So in the Caribbean, there are about the main countries that speak that French-based Creole is Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Lucia, Dominica, and French Guyana that you call Cayenne, and that's on the main on the South American continent. Now, even among the Haitians, Saint Lucians, Dominicans, there are slight variations, but you would want to think that Dominica and Saint Lucia are probably the closest in terms of speaking the same. I most likely will understand everything a Dominican says, every word that a Dominican says in Creole, compared to if I'm listening to a Haitian, there might be one or two words. I understand the context of what he's saying, but a word might be different. And you'd appreciate just to say that the Creole is really a matter of the French-based language, but with some West African influences. And therefore, there are times also you can't find a word, the French, they will have an English word in there. But the point is, it's a mixture of languages. Spanish could be there also. We really don't know the full extent of all of it. But in each island, there are slight variations. But the countries that are principally French, like Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guyana, their Creole is closer to the French.
What role does Creole play in the daily lives of St. Lucia, and why is its recognition important?
Very good question. But if we just have to go back a bit, if I go back at least the 1960s, when majority of the people in St. Lucia spoke Creole. So, for example, my father, who was born in the 1930s, or my grandmother, who was born in, that's my paternal grandmother, who was born in the 1915s, they came through, and up to about 1980 when my grandmother was alive, she can't speak English. She understands how are you and good morning. But if you want a conversation with that generation, you had to speak mainly Creole to them. And again, it had to do with education. If they didn't get an education, which they did not get, the language which they conversed in was Creole. And therefore, it was very important that you understand Creole because you had to be speaking to your grandparents. Most of us had to speak to our grandparents in Creole because while we had an education to get to speak English, they didn't. And you can understand why, especially in St. Lucia, the change between the French and the English, 14 times, 7 times French, 7 times English. St. Lucian younger children of the 1880s after emancipation, most of them didn't get an opportunity to go to school, so they had to speak the language Creole. And the language Creole, of course, is always said that it is a language of resistance because it was a language that the slaves spoke when they didn't want the masters, especially the French or the English, to understand. So it's really important that Creole was what really dominated the lives of the people. I can tell you, I went to the doctor with my grandmother, and I have to be an interpreter between the doctor and herself, because while the doctor is an English doctor from the UK or from Canada, he or she asked the question, and my grandmother, I will have to translate and translate between them. So it was very important. Even in the 70s, the radio became very important, that Creole was spoken extensively on the radio because these people, there was a huge audience of people to listen to that. So Creole is very important. Even the courts, when the people went to court, they cannot speak English, so you had to have an interpreter between the what the magistrate or what the lawyers were asking, and what let's say the person was a Creole speaker who couldn't speak English, he had an interpreter. So all that is important because it affected the daily lives of the people. They had to speak in Creole because they did not know English.
So that's why I feel like, why do you think that the recognition of Creole in Saint Lucia is very important?
Very important. I mean, now with majority of the young Saint Lucians, I mean, from the 1970s, almost everybody has an opportunity to go to school to speak English. So Kweyol is not dependent upon so much for people to express themselves, but you need to preserve it because it's your culture. So much so the government in the 1990s, especially 1997, allowed Kweyol to become part of what happens in Parliament. So a parliamentarian can speak Kweyol, but he ought to at least interpret what he would have said in Kweyol in English because, of course, he's speaking to a number of people. But Kweyol was allowed in the Parliament, and it's also allowed, as I said, in the courts. So there is a move in St. Lucia, has been a move for the last 30 years or more, to begin to reincorporate Creole into the daily lives of people, and especially as we celebrate issues like Journée Kweyol, which is the last Sunday of every month, of October, sorry, not every month, the last Sunday every year in October.
So how is the government of Saint Lucia planning to support the integration of Creole into its official settings, such as elementary schools, judiciary? So what are the steps being taken by the government so far?
Right. So because we realize that if you do not teach the younger generation a language, if they don't practice it at home, you will lose the language. So the government has begun encouraging Creole speaking, and we've introduced Creole speaking into our elementary school. So from kindergarten, we begin now to have conversations in Creole. Of course, while it is written, but it's not where the written aspect that is emphasized at that young age. It is the oral tradition. So yes, the government has ensured that Creole is taught at the kindergarten level, and not just kindergarten, but by grade 1, grade 2, so that students can begin to speak the language. So that's one way the government does it. Another way the government will do it is by encouraging government programs in Creole to disseminate information to the people. I mean, there still might be about 5%, could be, I'm not quite sure, but there could be about 5% of Saint Lucians who still depend on Creole entirely, who will have problems understanding if you're trying to discuss an issue with them in English. So the government realized that they have to disseminate information to these persons, but they have to do it through Creole news, through Creole information. And even in the parliament, if you go to the Saint Lucian Parliament or you listen to the Saint Lucian Parliament, you will see the moderators, one person speaking English, one person speaking Creole. So people who are following at home, they can tell them what exactly is happening.